Alright guys, Murph's here, and today I'm going to go over a little thought exercise with you guys. Now, for those of you who might be new to the channel, thought exercises are when I pick a situation or scenario and then I game plan what weapon systems I would carry for that. And I've been doing this thing ever since I was a kid because I use it as a tool in order to be able to understand, expand my own understanding or evaluation of different firearms capabilities, all those types of things. Put myself into different people's shoes or different situations and look at it from a different point of view so that I can better understand what might drive somebody to make the choices that they make. So a lot of times these types of scenarios will follow up with some limiting factors and stuff like that to make me not necessarily just pick the things that I would normally pick anyway, or perhaps make me really have to defend my own decisions and all those types of things. So situations can range from, like, arming a military post-World War II, or perhaps the rifle that I would use on a Kentucky elk hunt. Now, I've done a couple of these. There are like 4 of you who actually like them, and from time to time they actually request them. So if you're interested in this concept, check the description. I will have links to other videos annotated there. Now, today's subject, we will be covering what I would carry as a police officer in the 70s. Interesting concept, right? So let's go ahead and kind of dive into how it is that we're going to set this up and some of the things that we're going to discuss along the way. So first off, we have to go ahead and pick a setting for our, fictitious police department. And at first, I was going to make a lot of very vague references to a very large population center somewhere along the east coast of the country and refer to it as, I don't know, the Big Pear or something like that. But as I was doing research for this particular video into police firearms of the 1970s, I actually found that New York City, which if you guys didn't get the reference, that's who I was talking about, actually had a couple of handguns that were available for use by officers during this time period. So I decided to go ahead and settle on that. I am choosing what I would carry as a New York City police officer in 1973. I just kind of picked 1973 out of a hat. I knew I wanted to do it in the 1970s. This is a very interesting time in American policing, as it were. There's significant upheaval in the country. There's a lot of riots and stuff like that going on. And this is actually kind of the origin for the militarization, I guess you could call it, of the police. This is where SWAT comes from and all these types of things. This time period is what kind of causes all of this to occur. And it's really not too different from stuff that we've seen in the past couple of years as well. It's kind of one of those, there's nothing really new under the sun type deals, especially when you're talking about the human condition and history in general. All right, so New York City, 1973, in this scenario, Murph is a bright-eyed rookie police officer. What am I going to pick for my revolver? Well, on the NYPD's list were 3 different revolvers: the Colt Official Police, the Smith & Wesson Model 10, and the Dan Wesson Model 11, all with 4-inch barrels, all chambered in .38 Special. So, like, right off the bat, we've already cut off semi-autos, which, of course, especially with the knowledge that I have now, I prefer semi-automatic handguns for duty-type uses, but during this time, that was not necessarily a standard. Semi-autos were still treated with a lot of disdain. Disdain might be the wrong word, but there was some concerns as to whether or not your average police officer would be able to safely handle a semi-automatic handgun in different types of situations and stuff like that. They're not necessarily drop safe. 1911 is going to have a little bit of an issue with that, as well as a concern that perhaps somebody would try to rep through too many rounds too fast and potentially injure somebody, because we've never seen that happen in police-involved shootings. Anyway, so semi-autos are off the market, and honestly, there's not that many semi-autos to consider at this time period. Not in the United States, at least, and definitely not that I would consider viable for police-type use. Not in the way that I would want, not in comparison to today, I guess I should say. All right, now, of course, also, .38 Special would not necessarily have been my first choice during this time period either. I would have preferred something more in a combat Magnum, perhaps a little bit heavier frame .357 Magnum. However, it's very common right now in this time period for .38 to be more or less the standard. And as much as it may not necessarily have a lot of the energy dynamic that I want to see out of a fighting cartridge, it is still acceptable for the time period. And also, using a revolver gets me in touch with some better ammunition, more more optimally designed for wound channels and stuff like that. And that's going to be really helpful with the 38 special loading. Is it something that I would scoff at for use for self-defense even today? No, not really. I carry 38s all the time. I was carrying one just earlier today. However, that does not mean that I want to serve with it in a duty type sense. But in this case, the NYPD has removed my options. So 4-inch barreled 38s, let's go ahead and talk about these. And I want to go ahead and identify this right off the bat here, guys. I love Smith & Wesson revolvers. I'm a huge Smith & Wesson revolver guy. So the Model 10 definitely stands out in my estimation right off the bat. It's, you know, kind of like if you were to ask me what I would want to carry today, Glocks would be a go-to option for me. At this time, if you tell me that one of my options are a Model 10, that's where my mind immediately wants to go. I actually owned a Model 10 for a little while. I had a 6-inch barreled version, but I eventually let it go in order to be able to get a hold of Glock 26. Kind of regret that now, but you know, hindsight, what can you do? So with that being the case, let's really spend more time evaluating the other options to see if something's better than the Model 10. So let's take a look at the Colt Official Police. Now, I have to be 100% honest, guys. I am not the biggest fan of Colt products in general, but a lot of that has to do with just some issues that I have with Colt as a company, and I'm really hoping that CZ in the current state of things kind of turns that company around. However, at this time, Colt is most definitely a titan of a manufacturer. However, I have never cared for the handling characteristics of the Colt Official Police. The ergonomics just don't quite work for me. In addition to that, I also do not like the manual of arms. Now, the Colt Official Police utilizes a cylinder latch that you pull to the rear, unlike a Smith & Wesson Model 10, whose latch that you would push forward. And whenever handling revolvers and stuff like that is I consider it more natural to push that cylinder release, and then as I use these fingers to push out the cylinder, I run my hand up the frame to the ejector, smack that ejector, and now I'm back in business getting more rounds into the cylinder. That's how I've trained around revolvers for a very long time. It wouldn't be that big of an issue to use the Colt cylinder release, other than it doesn't go the direction that I want it to. So my hand is moving this way and then it moves up. Is that a big deal? It's fractions of a second, but it irritates me. It's a difference in a manual of arms. It's kind of like how I prefer on shotguns my safety to be in front of the trigger guard as opposed to behind the trigger guard, because I don't want to come from behind the trigger, past the trigger, to the trigger. I want to come off the safety onto the trigger. It's a more natural an easier flow for my body. This is very logical, whereas pulling back on the cylinder release and then come up and hit the ejector is not as natural to me. It's a nitpicky thing, but it is a difference. It is something that I've observed. And the bigger concern is the fact that I don't care for the Colt Official Police's ergonomics. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Dan Wesson Model 11. Now, what's interesting for this time period is that the Dan Wesson was probably the least popular of the options available to New York City police officers. Most guys would not go for them. They were much more interested in the time-honored designs of the Model 10 and the Colt Official Police. The question is, why? Now, normally I would say with Dan Wesson revolvers, we would get a really great opportunity to be able to have interchangeable barrels. That's one of the selling point of Dan Wesson revolvers, is that it is incredibly easy to swap barrels to shorter or longer versions. You can go from like 2.5 inches up to 8 inches. However, the NYPD specifically requested that the Model 11 provided to their officers not have that barrel change capability. They wanted it fixed at a 4-inch barrel. So we kind of lose that option right off the bat. And I do have to say that it's been some years since I've handled or really even seen a Dan Wesson revolver in person. I remember a couple of years ago, and honestly, I say a couple of years ago, but it's probably more like a decade now, Dan Wesson revolvers seem to just be falling all over the place. They're picking them off the ground like leaves. But now, it's been a while, and that might be a regional thing. I've definitely moved around quite a bit since then, but it's been a long time since I've seen or handled a Dan Wesson revolver. One thing I would point out about Dan Wesson revolvers is I really don't like the styling, which again seems incredibly nitpicky, but it is, because these I got to find some way to be able to differentiate these handguns and decide what I like and what I don't like and what would drive me towards my decision. I don't care for the styling of the Dan Wesson Model 11. Now, in addition to that, this handgun was not terribly popular, and I can tell that because it's really difficult to find information on the Dan Wesson Model 11. There's not a lot of information out there. There's not very many people doing reviews or writing articles on it. It was forums that I had to find what information I did. Now, from a handling standpoint, what I find very interesting is the cylinder release on the Dan Wesson, which is located along the frame on the crane of the revolver. And that is very natural because as this hand comes up to cradle the cylinder, this thumb would be able to activate the cylinder release, which kind of leaves this hand just coming up to get a hold of the extractor or the ejector and dump all the cartridges on the ground. That's actually kind of interesting. It's very savvy from a handling standpoint. However, that becomes problematic with holsters because you need to make sure that you come across a holster that's not necessarily going to activate that cylinder release. And you don't really have that problem with the Colt Official Police or the Smith & Wesson, especially since those handguns are time-honored police sidearms. There are a lot of holster options out there on the market for them during this time period. So if I were to put these revolvers into more modern, I guess, comparison, I would say that the Colt Official Police would be the Glock of its time period, at least amongst these three handguns. Very popular amongst police, widely used, however, it also has some ergonomic complaints depending on the user. And the Smith & Wesson Model 10 would be a modern striker-fired Smith & Wesson M&P. It's right up there competing with the Glock. It has just as wide of an aftermarket support as the Glock does, or in this case, the Colt Official Police, and is honestly a 6 of one, half a dozen of another type decision. If you like one over the other, then go for it. You're not really losing anything by going with either option. However, that makes the Dan Wesson kind of like an FN509 or something along those lines, where it has very interesting features, but the aftermarket support is not necessarily present, and it's more frequently sought out by people who are trying to be angsty and go against the grain by not picking mainstream handguns for their duty type uses. So, looking at these options and going back and forth on these for quite a bit, I am going to wind up selecting the Smith & Wesson Model 10. I have experience with the system. It works in a manner that I'm used to handling. The manual of arms is something that I already very naturally work around to begin with, so it would be a very natural thing for me to be able to employ if I had to have my life depend on my ability to be able to use that revolver. So I've selected the Smith & Wesson Model 10, but what about off-duty carry? Because the NYPD also had a couple of standard offerings for that as well. Now, these would include the Colt Detective Special and the Smith & Wesson Model 36 Chief Special. Now, the Detective Special is really just a short-barreled police special. There's not a whole lot of difference. It's a 6-round cylinder. It's a relatively large frame with a full-size grip. However, the Smith & Wesson Model 36 is an actual legitimate snub-nose 5-shot compact J-frame revolver. Now, again, getting into my own biases here, I actually own several Smith & Wesson Model 36s. Specifically, this 3-inch barreled model, as well as this 1 7/8 inch barreled model, which were also the ones that were available for use by New York City police officers. So with this, once again, we're looking at kind of my Smith & Wesson bias, especially since I have an extensive amount of rounds through both of these platforms. So I think at this point we can pretty well effectively say that I'm pushing the Colt Detective Special to the side here, and now debating between these two options right here. Now, as we can see, the 3-inch barreled model does not just have a longer barrel, but also much larger grips, which makes this gun a lot easier to shoot. It makes the sights a lot easier to pick up and all that kind of stuff, and would be an excellent off-duty defensive option. However, this gun is not that much harder to shoot. I actually frequently carry and train with this particular revolver. I don't have too much trouble picking up the sights, though the 3-inch version is just a little bit easier. It does index a little bit more naturally. However, this still does pretty good for its overall size. And if I were to go with this option, I could use this as both a backup gun as well as an off-duty gun. Whereas this might be a little bit more difficult to do that same kind of thing with. So I think that makes the decision very easy. In this case, I would stick with Smith & Wesson yet again with the Model 36 in a 1 7/8 inch barrel as my backup and off-duty gun. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers what I, as a police officer in 1973 New York City, would carry. I hope you guys found this conversation interesting overall. And just a little aside, if you have any experience with the Dan Wesson Model 11, I would be interested to hear about it as far as, you know, some of your thoughts and impressions and handling it in comparison to a lot of the more run-of-the-mill mainstream offerings out there on the market. Ruger, Smith & Wesson, Colt, all those types of things. Now, aside from some channel updates, guys, that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day. All right, guys, for channel updates, if you found this content interesting or you've enjoyed previous stuff that I put up and would like to interact more with people of a similar disposition or get better access to me for questions or some bonus content and stuff like that, Murph's Law is now on Facebook. So go ahead and check the description and join our Facebook page. Would love to have you there. All right, now with that, have a good day.